Okay, so this is kind of where we left off in the last video, talking about the Madrasa Mosque Mausoleum complex of Sultan Hassan. This is the mausoleum area behind the Qibla wall. And like I said, the Sultan himself, Sultan Hassan, was actually never buried here, but his sons were. And it really serves as a reminder of the variety of regional styles that are present in Islamic art, especially after the end of the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties. So if we, like I was saying in the last video, at the end of the last video, this mosque, madrasa, mausoleum complex is more severe, less ornamental than the Alhambra complex that we looked at. So you could see the differences in the styles. There's just a lot of regional styles in Islamic art, which makes sense. I mean, the regions it's fairly vast, especially for an ancient empire. This is probably beginning to become one of the largest empires since the Roman Empire in the world. So obviously they're going to have regional styles within the Islamic art, under that Islamic art umbrella. So we'll talk about the Ottoman Empire. So after the downfall of the Seljuks, several local dynasties established themselves in Anatolia, and among them were the Ottomans, founded by Osman I. And the Ottomans are really the next kind of people that we'll talk about that are underneath that Islamic empire. And the Ottomans are the ones that really go on to expand the empire even further into Asia, Europe, and North Africa. And by the middle of the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire was one of the world's greatest powers. So the Ottoman Empire was very mighty, and definitely rivaled the Roman Empire in might and size, for sure. So under the Ottoman Empire, the mosque plan ends up changing significantly. The main structure was typically a square covered by a dome, and then in early times, and then it was actually transformed into the square covered by the dome, but it would be used in multiples. So they would just add them all together, lots of square covered domes. And so just remember, under the Ottoman Empire, the square covered dome and multiples of the square covered dome in one complex would be used under the Ottoman Empire. They were really into that. And the hypostyle mosque with the big hypostyle halls and the many columns starts to just fade away and is no longer a popular form anymore under the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople in Istanbul in 1453. Or Constantinople is now in Istanbul, is what I meant by that. Back in the day, it was Constantinople, and the Ottoman Turks conquered that in 1453. And here they firmly established their architectural code of dome-on-cube construction of their mosques. And they're responsible, actually, for converting Hagia Sophia into a mosque. And they added minarets to Hagia Sophia to make the Byzantine Church a mosque. And Ottoman builders were not very happy with the Hagia Sophia, and they moved on to the central plan mosque after this. So Sinan the Great, we'll talk about Sinan the Great. He was an Ottoman architect, and the Ottoman central plan mosques really came into popularity around 1520 or so, and the best are thought to be constructed by the Ottoman architect Sinan. And he worked for the great Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. And the typical 16th century Ottoman mosque was a creative collage of domed units, artfully arranged in geometric spaces. And the thing that Sinan did with his designs is that he was able to find solutions to the problem of unifying all of those additive dome-on-cube constructions. And he was able to make them come together in a unified piece, and at the same time was able to create a really cavernous, centralized space with harmonious proportions. So instead of looking kind of chaotic by adding dome and cube together like a lot of the earlier architects did, Sinan was able to create a really harmonious space and a really large cavernous centralized space as well, and harmonious proportions. And another thing to note about 16th century mosques is that the domes were constructed typically with a lot of extra support, since they were built in areas prone to earthquakes. So there's been plenty of times in the past where there's been a big earthquake that came through in these areas of, say Turkey, and a lot of the modern buildings fall, but these mosques are able to survive because they were built basically to be earthquake proof. So we'll take a look at the Mosque of Selim II. And this was built by the Ottoman architect Sinan in Edirne, Turkey, 1568 through 1575. And the mosque pictured here is thought to be Sinan, the Ottoman architect's masterpiece. He made it for Sultan Selim II. And this is basically a massive dome with 4 pencil-shaped minarets, which are each 200 feet high, which is some of the highest minarets in the Islamic architecture as a whole. And really the interior is where you can see the genius of the architect Sinan, though, not so much on the outside. But you can see, there's a series of domes stacked, or actually squares, and then the dome on the top, lots of towers, and then those 4 very tall minarets. So we'll talk about the interior a little bit. The mihrab or prayer niche is recessed deeply enough to allow for window illumination on 3 sides. And that window illumination really allows the tiled panels of the lower walls to sparkle in the sunlight. In fact, there are almost 300 windows in this mosque. And that play of light on the tiles and the pattern really creates a heavenly effect. And it changes throughout the day as the sun moves, too. So it's very dynamic. So here's the view of the dome in the Mosque of Selim II in Edirne, Turkey by Sinan. So it's basically a fusion of an octagon and a dome-covered square with 4 half domes at the corners. So the plan features geometric clarity and precise numerical ratios, and this results in a fluid representation of geometric volumes, basically. And it's the culminating solution to Sinan's lifelong search for a vast yet unified interior. Sinan's forms are clear, legible. They use mathematical equations, like I said. Height, width, masses all relate to each other in a ratio of about 1 to 2. And precise numerical ratios are used all over the complex. The forecourt of the building, for example, covers an equal area to the mosque itself. So the forecourt is the same size as the mosque. So this is, this numerical ratios in architecture is very reminiscent of Greek architecture, where, the Greeks used these ratios to create harmony and order in architecture. So that's what they're doing here. That's what Sinan did here with his Mosque of Selim II. And probably other things that he made too as well, but this particular piece is what we're looking at. And it's very reminiscent of Greek architecture where, they use these mathematical ratios to create harmony. And most architectural historians regard the Mosque of Selim II as the climax of Ottoman architecture. Sinan actually built this mosque when he was almost 80 years old. And in it, he sought to surpass the greatest achievements of the Byzantine architects, and Sinan actually considered this to be his masterpiece. And as you can see, there's a ton of windows inside the dome here that's pictured with kind of a centralized motif here in the middle. So lots of light and a very unified space, but also very varied as well because of all the pattern. So we'll talk about Isfahan. And at the same time, the Ottomans were thriving in Turkey. The area of Iran, which is where Isfahan is located, was in a period of turmoil. Like I said, the Mongols had come in, taken over for a while, and it was just in turmoil. And Isfahan was the capital during this time, and it was under siege when this mosque called the Madrasa Imami was built. And we're not going to look so much at the mosque itself or the exterior of the mosque or anything like that. We're actually just going to look at some of the tile work inside the mosque. because it's considered to be some of the finest tile work in existence in Islamic architecture anyway. So this is the mihrab from the Madrasa Imami in Isfahan, Iran, 1354, glazed mosaic tilework. So this is the mihrab, like I said, and it's considered to be an example, a really exceptional example of Islamic Iranian ceramic tile work. And the golden age of Islamic tile work is in the 16th and 17th centuries. And at this time, Muslim artists used two basic techniques. The first technique is the mosaic tile work, which we've talked about a little bit. It's very similar to the mosaics that the Romans created from tesserae. It's basically a technique where potters fire large ceramic panels of a single color in the kiln, and then they cut pieces from that to make smaller pieces, and then they set the pieces in plaster to create imagery and pattern. And then the other technique is cuerda seca, and it's called dry cord tile work, and it was introduced in the Umayyad Spain area during the 10th century. And cuerda seca tiles are multicolored, so it's tiles that are painted with multicolors instead of one color like the mosaic tile work is. Cuerda seca are multicolored and can have complex geometrical, vegetal patterns and even Arabic script on them. And it's much easier to use them instead of the mosaic tile work. And it's more economical than mosaic tile work because the vast surfaces of the interior or exterior of a structure could be covered with larger tiles with the multicolored surface. And it just is faster and more economical because it's faster, because time is money, right? And, those smaller mosaic tiles, it just takes thousands of them to create a pattern. Whereas on these ones, it can be painted on, fired, and then placed on the building relatively quickly. But when builders use cuerda seca tiles to cover curved surfaces like domes, vaults, minarets, the ceramicists had to fire the tiles in the exact shape required, which is tough because when you fire something, it typically will shrink a little bit. So you have to allow for shrinkage, and it can be really difficult to figure out. Also, polychrome tiles or multicolored tiles have other drawbacks. The ceramicists would fire all the glazes at the same temperature, obviously, so some of the colors wouldn't turn out as brilliant as, say, a mosaic tile would, because for each color they would fire it at a different temperature to get that tile to be at its best color vibrancy. But when you have many colors on one tile, like they did in the dry cord or cuerda seca tile work, it just didn't come out as brilliant in color as the mosaic tiles did. And so they didn't reflect the way the light, the way that the mosaic tiles would either. Since mosaics tiles are they're a little bit more irregular surfaces, they catch the light a little differently than like a flat tile of the cuerda seca would. So the mosaic is definitely going to be catching the light a lot more. So the preparation of the multicolored cuerda seca tiles also requires greater care to prevent colors from running together during firing. The potters outline the motifs with cords containing manganese, which leaves a matte black line between the colors when firing. So you can probably tell the difference between the two in that they're larger tiles with black matte lines between the colors. That would indicate, dry cord or cuerda seca tile work. So anyway, let's talk about this mihrab pictured here some more. I believe this one is actually mosaic tile work. There might be some mixture. I'm not quite sure. I don't know if the book actually told us one way or another between, cuerda seca and mosaic here. It's really a masterpiece, this piece that's pictured here in this slide. It features calligraphy in its decoration and is an example of the perfect union between Islamic calligraphy art and abstract ornamentation, which would be the patterns and abstracted flower shapes and that kind of thing. The mihrab features a pointed arch that bears an inscription from the Quran in Kufic, which is that angular script used in the early Qurans. I believe, this here, or actually it might be here, actually. They're talking about the pointed arch area.